everybody, Calm Biker here, and it's time for another quick episode in the Video Editing Basics for Vloggers series. In the last episode I talked about how you can crop a video and zoom in and out essentially, and I said in that one I would talk about pan and zoom in the next one. So that's what we're going to look at today. Pan and zoom is where you track the motion of something on the screen or in your video, or where you're zooming in a kind of animated way. So rather than just cropping the video and it being at that size, you're zooming over a period into a particular area. And it's based around the same tools. So I shall show you that today. And I'm going to do it based on this little video. I've already prepared a little clip. I've removed the audio so I can talk over it more easily. And it's all about this car on the right hand side and its somewhat dodgy spinner attachment on the wheel. You see it there wobbling away. So I thought it'd be interesting to firstly zoom into that spinner, let's say over a period of time, and then there's a bit at the end of the video where I've obviously moved my head, and that means the spinner shoots off to one side. There he goes, and then back again, and again, and back again. So I thought I'll show you how to zoom in on that and then track that motion so that we're looking at the spinner all the time. And you can use this type of thing for, well, the classic is cyclists going through red lights, that kind of thing, where it's something in the distance and you want to highlight it. Very good to zoom from the full frame to that point and then track it as that cyclist goes through the red light. And that's just an example. I don't want to offend cyclists. I'm a cyclist myself. So let's make a start. So I told you last time about how to crop, and zooming and cropping are essentially the same thing. The difference is the time period. So we'll start by just bringing up the tool, which is the Event Pan and Crop tool, and that shows us what we saw in the last episode, the rectangle that shows you the area that will be in the video. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run the video on a bit just by moving the selection point. So let's try and find a point where it's pretty stationary. That's within the frame. So about there, about 5 seconds in. And while I'm at that point, I'm now going to do my cropping. So I'll bring this in, crop it, center it on the spinner. That center point, by the way, really useful if you are highlighting something. You can put that center point right on the thing that you're going to zoom to and that you're going to track. And that makes your life much easier when you're tracking particularly. Now, when we did that, if you were paying a lot of attention, you will have seen there's this little timeline that runs along the bottom of the video event FX window or pane or section. And you'll see we've got a little diamond on there. And there's another one right at the beginning. Now, the one right at the beginning is the default full frame marker. This one here is telling us that at that point we've set what's called a keyframe, and the system will automatically animate between the two. So if we click over here, which is the same as clicking the timeline down here at the beginning, you'll see we've still got the full frame in our rectangle. If we click back on our keyframe there, we've got the bit that we set. And if we scan backwards frame by frame, you'll see that the system has automatically animated between those two. So as we pan back, you can see the rectangle is actually growing, so it will smoothly animate between those 2 points. And if we play the video from the beginning, you'll see that zoom happening, and it will zoom for the first 5-ish seconds because that's where we set our keyframe, and then it will be steady. So let's watch that back. So the zoom's already happening, still zooming, and then the zoom stops. And that's it. It really is as simple as that. You can do the same for zooming out again if we wanted to. We just set more keyframes, and it will always look at a pair of keyframes that are next to each other and animate between the two automatically. Now I can use exactly the same method to do the panning. So let's move the selection point so we get that back to a point where the wheel is roughly in the center of the video. And we'll start our animation from this point. We could do it right back from the 5-second mark, but that will take quite a while. This can be quite a time-consuming process, and you'll see why in a moment. So what we want is a keyframe at that point. Now we could start resizing things and trying to put them back to where they were to set a keyframe that had the same zoom as previously. Or we can actually just click on this button here, Create Keyframe. And that just adds one. You see we've got a diamond added. You can take them away again by doing that button, the Delete Keyframe, but we want this one here. So that will mean that this keyframe and this keyframe both have exactly the same cropping applied. So there'll be no animation between the two. Or if you imagine there is animation, every frame is exactly the same size. From this point forwards, what we'll do is track that tyre, that wheel. And going back to what we said before about this centre dot being quite useful, because panning, tracking things around can get quite intensive because there's lots of movement going on, especially with a helmet camera. You know, it's not a smooth track from one place to another where you can just set a keyframe, set your keyframes 10 seconds apart and it's smoothly tracked between them. What you find with helmet cameras is it tends to be really bouncy because you're moving your head, you're breathing, the bike's vibrating, you know, it's windy, all these things are having an effect. So you end up setting lots of keyframes to get this kind of thing working. So what we'll do first, I'm going to just pan it on for about 5-10 seconds, something like that. Let's go about here. So there's definitely been a bit of movement. And I'm going to set it at that point. Just move that section so that center point is back on the focus of our video, which is that wheel. And then at that point until the end of the clip, I'm just going to zoom back out again. So it looks like we've zoomed in, we've let it bounce about for a bit before I start tracking. Then we start tracking the tyre, and then we zoom back out again. And I showed you last time, we can just right click on the frame in the video event effects and choose restore to get back to that point. We've now got 5 keyframes, full frame, part frame, the same part of frame, slightly moved for tracking, and then zoomed out again. And you'll see if we run that clip back. So here's the zoom, then we're going to keep the frame stationary, and you can see everything's kind of bouncing about a bit. Then we're going to start our tracking motion, but because of my head bouncing, it's not a very good tracking motion, and then zoom out again at the end. So what I'm going to do is go back to that first keyframe at the beginning of the bit we want to track, and just start using the button here to move on one frame at a time. And depending on how much movement there is, I'll go between 3 and 10 frames at a time. So I'll flick it on 3 frames. Not much movement there. So there's 10 frames. There's not been a huge amount of movement. My head's moved a little bit, so the center point here is no longer in the middle of the wheel, so I'll put that back. And then go back to the first frame and just go through it frame by frame again and see what it looks like in the preview. Make sure it's not too bouncy. That's not too bad. And then you do it again. As I say, quite time consuming. So I'll move on. That's got a bit of movement there, so I'll drag it down a bit to centralize it again. Remember, between those 2 keyframes it will smoothly pan. That one's a little bit of movement, but not too much. And then we carry just doing that all the way through the video. If you're really keen to get it absolutely perfect, then you have to do it 1 frame at a time. If you don't mind a bit of wobble, and the brain can cope with a bit of wobble, then 3 or 4 frames at a time is generally reasonable. What I'll do, I'll finish that off. I won't subject you to that, or I'll do it on fast forward so you can see me doing it, and then we'll watch the video back. One little tip, if you do move on 10 frames and there's not been much movement, so here we've not got much at all, but then there's a quick movement afterwards, don't just put your next keyframe after the quick movement because it will animate all the way through. So before the quick movement, click on the create keyframe just to create one exactly where the last one was, and that way your animation will be a lot smoother. Remember as well that when you're doing this, you can always come back and insert keyframes in between at a later point. You don't have to do them from start to finish. So if there is a bit that's still a bit jerky, you can go back frame by frame, find it, find the center point, and pan accordingly. So that's that finished. So if we now watch that from start to finish again. So we're zooming, moving in, then holding it steady, so we've got a bit of bouncing there still, and then we'll go to the bit where we're panning nicely and trying to track that tyre. You see there's a little bit of bouncing still. We could add extra keyframes for that, but we are now tracking that around quite nicely. Hope that one is helpful to you. Thanks for watching everyone. Ride safe, and I shall talk to you all again soon.